Hello everyone, I'm Santiago, and today I'm gonna be testing the Sniper Elite franchise on the GeForce GTX 1050 Ti. For performance monitoring, I'll be using CAM, excepting on Sniper Elite 1, since that's a DirectX 8 game. If you want to download the software, there's a link down in the description. So the Sniper Elite franchise, I'll be doing Sniper Elite 1, 2, 3, 4, and Zombie Army Trilogy, which is a zombie game made with the Sniper Elite 2 engine. To skip to those particular games, check the timestamps down in the description. So well, first of all, we got Sniper Elite 1. In order to make it work, I had to use a mod that allows us to use very high resolutions. For example, 1080p, you can use it, but the aspect ratio won't be correct, since this game was made with 4:3 in mind. But this mod allows you to use 16:9 just fine, and I played it at 4K. I know in the menu it says 1920x1080, but by editing a config file from the mod, you're able to select any resolution you want. So I selected 3840x2160, so the game is running at 4K, and to be expected is running at over 100 frames per second. It's a very old game, DirectX 8, you see how it goes. You might see a drop here and there when there's an explosion or transparencies and you're aiming with the rifle at the same time. Not really a big problem, we don't drop below 60 frames per second, so it runs totally fine. I talk to you again in the next game. Now I'm testing Sniper Elite 2 or Sniper Elite B2, and this one was released way after Sniper Elite 1. We get DirectX 11 support on this one, and I tested both 1080p and 1440p. On 1080p we're over 60 frames per second with maximum settings pretty much all the time, but for 1440p I had to lower the settings a little bit in order to stay closer to 60 frames per second. The problem is when you're just aiming with the rifle at a very long distance, when you use the sight and zoom in a lot, you get a big frame rate drop. There is heavy use of depth of field there. It seems that the draw distances are not properly set when you're at the maximum zoom distance. That's what I'm suspecting, because the frame rate drops sometimes can be quite big, but the game still runs just fine. This one introduced the X-ray kill cams that show how some organs and bones just shatter with a bullet, which is one of the best features in the game if you ask me, apart from the realistic bullet drop. But yeah, it runs just fine. If you want to do 4K, I recommend lowering the settings to maintain a smoother frame rate, but it's completely possible if you're fine by dropping below 60 or just lowering the settings a little bit more. I talk to you again in the next game. Now I'm testing the Zombie Army Trilogy, which was made using the Sniper Elite V2's engine. I think it was made by the same developers. It's pretty much a co-op zombie shooter that I found to be very challenging. You can play it by your own or with some extra people online. It's very fun, and this is a pack with the 3 Zombie Army games, but they were bundled into one. So you're getting a lot of missions here, but it runs worse than Sniper Elite V2 because it uses way more transparencies and there are more particles on screen. For example, there's a lot of fog, a lot of smoke, a lot of of fire because there are ruins everywhere, plus there can be a lot of enemies on screen. The worst performance hit so far was when throwing a grenade, for example, and you hit many zombies. You can get like half the frame rate for 3 or 4 seconds. Not really a deal breaker if you ask me. You'll see it when I throw grenades and I hit more than 5 enemies with it. Other than that, the game seems to be running just fine. I will also show you 1440p, and on that one I had to lower some settings in order to be closer to 60 frames per second, but the game's still completely playable. I'll talk to you again in the next game. Now I'm testing Sniper Elite 3, and on this one, once again, I'll show you 1080p with the maximum settings, and that was enough to be pretty much over 60 frames per second the big majority of the time, and so far 1080p was fine, but then when I switched to 1440p I had to lower a couple settings here and there in order to maintain closer to 60 FPS. Not perfect 60s, but still a completely playable experience. I will play the game at 1440p since we get no jaggies whatsoever, at least on a 1080p monitor. So yeah, this one ran fine. To be expected, this was the last Sniper Sniper Elite game to be released on PS3 and Xbox 360, so that's something to keep in mind, but I'll talk to you again in the next game. And finally, Sniper Elite 4. This one was the first Sniper Elite to not be on PS3 and Xbox 360, but it was released very recently, so it was more GPU intensive than the previous ones. We have support for DirectX 12 and DirectX 11. This is one of those games that runs better on DirectX 12, at least on my end, and this is an NVIDIA GPU, so that's quite surprising if you ask me. On this one I only tested 1080p because when I use max settings I get over 30 frames per second, pretty much. The biggest performance hit was this area that I'm testing right now, which is a forest. So there are a lot of trees, a lot of foliage, all that kind of stuff. It's much more demanding than the other levels. Still 1080p max settings was enough to maintain 30 or a little over that. But if I wanted to be over 50 frames per second, I had to lower pretty much everything to low. But I kept shadows and draw distance on medium to maintain the static of the game a little bit more. And I got pretty much over 50 frames per second in the worst case scenario. And in some other parts I'm at 60 frames per second. So I think that's the sweet spot if you don't want to lower the resolution. But if you lower to 900p, I recommend using a mix between medium and high. On this game, having 50 frames per second or more was very important to me because it requires very precise aiming, so you can feel the difference very easily between 30 and 60. So yeah, on this one I recommend playing at 60 if possible. And what I don't like about this one is that you cannot turn off reflections. You can lower them to low, but you cannot completely turn them off, which is quite a bummer. We could get a very good performance boost by doing that, but I guess they try to keep the static of the game even at the lowest settings. But yeah guys, that's pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed this video, thanks for watching and see you next time.
Ammo's almost down empty.
Ich geb dir Deckung.
This will come in very useful. Bullets. Jaeger troops. Boehm isn't taking any chances. That's all. more bullets.